Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for chartsandmarkets.com. Welcome back to the show, Bob.
Yeah, good morning, Jim, and hello to our listeners.
And as usual, we have a couple of questions from our listeners. This question is from Michael. He asks, Bob, the utility sectors had a great run in 2019, a spectacular run-up in January 2020. In fact, taking into consideration the often cited January effect, the utility sector, along with gold and the U.S. dollar and the Swiss franc, appear to be nearly the only sectors that were positive for the month. Are utilities basically immune to changes in the market? And also, interestingly, gold was up in January while the GDX was down and the silver contract was flat.
That is a long question. So I looked up, Michael, I looked up the utilities, the XLU, and very overbought on the weekly RSI and extremely overbought on the daily RSI. So the action has been terrific. It can move with the bond future, which it has done. And as of this morning, we're getting technical signals overbought in the long bond. And when we do our technical work on the utilities index, we'll probably be getting the same. So it's been terrific. It's overbought, and probably if one was long, one should take the trade. And the other thing is that it's been a go-to sector when other sectors have been troubled. So, and then of course you've also had the action in the bond future. Again, when other sectors are not performing or getting hit, it's been sort of a flight to quality. But we had a target on the bond future of 162 on the rally. I think it hit 162.80 yesterday, and then, as I said, we've now got technical excesses on that. So we take the trade out of the bond future and lighten up on the utilities. And then the other one, of course, the U.S. dollar is being oversold near the turn of the year and has been firming up a little. And if the major markets correct, the stock markets correct more, it would be probably against a steady to slightly firming U.S. dollar. And then there also the question included that action in silver. Silver is the gold-silver ratio. We laughingly call it the metallic credit spread, because when you're in good times in the financial markets, silver will outperform gold, and the gold-silver ratio goes down. And then when you're in correction or going into a crisis in the financial markets, the gold-silver will go up. So gold-silver ratio has been rising a little, nothing spectacular yet, but the question is a good one, because Michael is aware that there's a big change developing here and is looking for confirmation, and hopefully we've been able to provide it.
We'll have more with Bob Hoye right after the break.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the 2019 drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Bob Hoye. Bob, do you follow war cycles?
Well, not recently, but with this question coming in, I took a look at it, and I remember back in the 70s, every researcher was into cycles, and indeed included war, and there was even somebody had put together kind of a spiral diagram showing wars and inflation and stuff like that. I couldn't find that one, and then I saw Armstrong's war cycle thing, which is more like a chart with ups and downs on it, but it's much simpler just to look at history, and what you have is that you get a long period of rising prices, and then you get inflation, and then there's usually a war between major countries. A really horrendous example was in the 1914-18 war. The Second World War in 1939 to 1945 was a trough war. But anyways, you can go back as far as you like in history. Is if you've got the price chart and it's rising up to a spike, that will also include a war. So, yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and there is a pattern in there. I have a tendency to shy away from cycle term. It's to look for recognizable patterns and to look and watch them recur. So with this century, it's been a lot of war, two major wars, then continuing, and governments become very intrusive and expansive in prosecuting a war. And then I know that the historian Will Durant described the 3rd century in Rome, which was similar to the last 100 years, where governments go out of control. And he did sum it up quite simply, saying that the government expanded to and prosecute a massive war. There was peace for a while, and then there was yet another huge war, and then you had inflation for 100 years, and then the economy collapsed. So yes, it's a fascinating subject, and but I think we're going into a period of calming, peace, a deflationary period, and we won't know about it for a while yet.
What's the real rate of inflation, and is it likely to increase?
Yeah, it's higher than what they report, but the powers that be calculated to make it look lower than it is. But we're in a period where you have a run-up in commodities and inflation, and the last one was 2008. Crude got to $147, and then that end of that speculation and that crash sets up inflation in financial assets, which most people don't understand. And this now is a great financial bubble, and it's getting very toppy. It looks like ending action, and in which case the play doesn't shift into another go at commodities. It shifts into just plain deflation, where there's so much debt expanded that it's impossible for individuals, countries, and companies to service the debt. So you go into a debt revulsion, a debt liquidation. You can call it a post-bubble contraction. Other people might call it a post-bubble depression. So that is the pattern that has prevailed for a long time.
Could interest rates surprise to the upside?
Yeah, you want to look at this one in, it's best to look at interest rates as deflated by the CPI. And there's a pattern there that on each bubble, the long rates in the senior economy decline with the boom. And even sometimes in the past, they declined to negative rates, net of inflation. And then once the boom is over, then real rates turn up, and this can be huge. Early 1930s, the increase was in the order of 10 percentage points. And this was also the case back even with the first bubble in 1720. So real long interest rates are likely to go up. And in a contraction, of course, the Treasury bill rate in the senior country, i.e. the U.S., those interest rates head down as people fly or, seek the most liquid items. And the most liquid item are shorter than 1 year stuff in U.S. dollars, and also the other liquid item is gold. So, the real interest rates have come down. They have not yet turned up, but it's probable that they would.
Are we likely to see collapsing real estate markets in 2020?
Yeah, it could start there. This bubble always seems to have some extra energy from time to time, particularly in the U.S. But yes, in previous great bubbles, you have had firm real estate prices in the major cities, and then they head down. And that was the case with the Great Florida land bubble in the 1920s, and then they went down. And also, we've got a price index from the bubble in 1873 in England, and with that contraction, which lasted 20 years, the price of farmland prices went down seriously for 20 years. So this is probable.
Insurance premiums are rising very rapidly for condominiums across British Columbia, and I would believe probably all of Canada. Some condos can't even get insurance now, and if they can, the rates are outrageous. Could that cause a collapse in the condo market?
Well, it certainly would be a negative, Jim, wouldn't it? Yes.
What's the repo crisis, and should we be concerned?
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating because early in 2019, you had a sudden loss of liquidity in Argentina and in Turkey, where their central bank ran out of U.S. dollar reserves. Their currencies got trashed, and their short rates went up. Actually, all rates went up. And then later on, now you can get a progression of these things, and later on, you had it appear in India and then China. So we spent the summer thinking that you would see a liquidity crisis in the money market in New York sometime in the fall. And indeed, that's what happened. All of a sudden, what was it, September the 10th or something like that? The liquidity in the New York money market disappeared, and the Fed moved very quickly on repos, which is providing money today and taking it back tomorrow, but it does put liquidity into the money market. But ironically, Jim, the amount of repo money they're putting in is a measure of the disappearance of liquidity when it was likely. But the exercise, plus generally good news on the Trade Department and with the Trump reform of business to better business conditions, the U.S. economy has stayed firmer than economies in other parts of the world.
Could President Trump be the catalyst to put an end to the manipulations of the world economy?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've been in more than 100 years of an experiment in authoritarian government. They've only happened twice before, as I mentioned, Rome in the 3rd century, and then Europe in the 1500s and into the early 1600s. And you end up with a system where the authorities are just taking so much of your money and intruding in your life, and it becomes too much of in your face and in your wallet government, and it sets up popular uprisings. And then that became evident in the early 1600s, and it's best followed in England. And the popular uprisings eventually added up to a great Reformation, where the influence of government was reduced. And of course, one of the things about governments has been the manipulations, where a small clique of economists dreamed up this idea that if they manipulate interest rates and manipulate the value of the currency, that recessions would be avoided. So let's take the U.S. example with the Federal Reserve. And when it was formed, the notion was that, well, the street then knew that when you had a financial crisis, it would lead to a recession. So their idea with the Fed was that, being lender of last resorts, there would be no financial crisis and therefore no recessions. That's the theory. And I must say that it is a very attractive theory, and it's a very desirable event. But the Fed opened its doors for business in January 1914, and since then there's been 18 recessions. So it doesn't work. So this is where I think with the next recession, the general public is going to look at the trillions of tax dollars that the central bankers have wasted in trying to prevent bad things. So if you're in a recession, so I think that a recession would really help the reform movement. So it'll help the popular uprising, and the whole point is that of the uprising is that people want to take over their government again, rather than being subjected to the whims and arbitrary actions of a central authority. I think we're all going to enjoy it.
Could China be on course to repeat the boom and bust that Japan had in the late 80s, early 90s?
Oh, I think so, yeah. They have had a fabulous growth rate, unbelievable construction, expansion of everything, but the business cycle doesn't run forever. And with a financial crisis, it would seriously turn down the China economy. And, but you've got a whole lot of people in the southern provinces that are used to freedom and prosperity. And you still got the Communist Party in office in Beijing. And with a slowdown, a serious one, the communists will, of course, still require all this taxation, but the southern provinces will say, So I think you can have not just a slowdown in China, but a serious contraction, and with it, a popular uprising that could trim the communist action, like bringing down the Berlin Wall in 1989. So it's going to be volatile, but it's going to be interesting.
Do you think the U.S. and China will complete a trade deal?
Yeah, that's a good one. It seems to be completing now. This is part of the reason for the latest rally, and it is more in favor of the U.S. So that's been a plus in the markets recently.
In the U.S., stock markets have been hitting new highs. We've seen predictions of the Dow hitting 50,000, 70,000, maybe even 100,000. What do you see ahead for the U.S. stock markets?
Yeah, well, gosh, even 50,000 is quite an extrapolation. And what we see now is the action's been terrific. And you have our technical work, which is we're getting huge momentum stuff, which we call upside exhaustions. You're getting changes in pattern, which we call sequential sells. and then at valuations that have been extraordinary. And these things you only find close to important highs. And the hit over the last couple of weeks, or coming out of the turn of the year, was quite severe, and it could be important. Now, our work in early October was that the market could rally, and it could rally strong enough into January that it could set an important high. And this then is based upon historical stuff whereby some of the really terrific markets have completed in the December-January window, like gold, for example, and silver. I think it was January 20th, 1980. Then you also had the Tokyo bubble with the Nikkei reaching its best in the last trading day of 1989. Also in New York, January 11th of 1973 was an important high and followed by the worst bear market since the 1930s. So I think Dow 50,000 is unlikely, and the 75,000 and the 100,000 is totally absurd. That might be maybe 50 or 60 years from now.
Are you bullish on crude oil?
Again, we've been bullish up until recently, and at Christmas time it became overbought, and it's had a pretty good correction. And the other thing is that the base metals, the other industrial commodities, base metals, have had a severe hit as well. This is what we were looking for. And actually, crude oil, base metals weakened and were turning down before the coronavirus scare hit the media and the market. So then they got down to support levels, particularly the base metals, and have had a bounce. But I think it's a wake-up call when you can have that hard a hit in industrial commodities that quick is important.
Where is capital currently flowing?
Well, this is a good question. In a boom, it flows into the hot items, and it also gets leveraged. So then you have this appearance of liquidity, but because it's leveraged, it really is very short-term liquidity. And then you have the real money, whereby more cautious investors are seeing extraordinary advances and extraordinary prices, so they're lightening up. And in a financial storm, that kind of money goes to the most liquid item. It's not looking for returns, it's just looking for a place to park so you can get it back. Now, the most liquid items are shorter than 1 year treasuries in the U.S., money market stuff, and also gold has a good liquidity as well. So this is where upon more change, the money will likely flow.
We'll have more with Bob Hoye right after the break.
Cypress Development Corp is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Bob Hoye. Bob, we had Dr. Mark Faber on the show a few weeks ago. He said he sees a severe and lengthy recession ahead for Canada. What's your point of view?
Oh, I'd agree with that. Yes, Canada's economy needs strong resource prices, which they are not strong. It also needs the ability to export these resources, at which the federal government is quite against development and transport of resources in Canada. So it's in in a tough situation here now, and then if the U.S. does go into a recession, which at some time is inevitable, Canada will indeed suffer.
If you were Prime Minister, what would you do to make Canada economically strong and prosperous?
Oh, I'd resign tomorrow. Get him out of the equation. He's a very young and naive man, and he's been a figurehead for very ambitious socialists to be involved in the Prime Minister's office and to turn the country back towards socialism. So it would be very good for him to go, plus the federal Liberal Party going as well.
Are cryptocurrencies here to stay?
Yeah, I think that with the reform movement on where people are going to gain more control of their government, and one of the tools of these intrusive governments has been currency depreciation. So, and part of this reform movement will be the public will demand a sound currency that governments won't be able to destroy. And I think somewhere in it, and I'm not sophisticated on cryptocurrencies, but somewhere within all of this experiment going on with these items, that a sound currency will result, and the notions of a national currency that national governments can depreciate is going to become history.
Has the bull market for cannabis stocks come and gone?
Oh, it was terrific. Absolutely fabulous, and became overbought and terrifically overbought. And our technical work was very good on that. And I think the sector is here to stay, but it's strictly a trading item now. The buy and hold on it ended quite a while ago. So it's an interesting situation, but now a trading item.
Automakers are planning to build more electric vehicles. Could this lead to a shortage in the commodities used in lithium-ion electric vehicle batteries?
Well, it's not any potential shortage in lithium and vanadium, and some of these exotic metals went away more than a year ago, and the prices have been weak. And I think as part of the political reform that is developing, the public is just not going to see providing incredible subsidies for electric cars. So take away the subsidies and let electric cars survive on their own. Also, a lot of these exotic metals were used in wind turbine setups, and I think the public's going to look at that and say, hey, this is uneconomic. We're not going to pay for it anymore. So as part of a great reform, the favorite promotions of the state are going to be adjudicated and wherever possible reduced or moderated or even just canceled. So the future of electric cars, they're all enthused about it now, but I think it's going to come under scrutiny.
Is the push for globalism part of a cycle?
Yeah, I think, again, I don't like that term cycle, but you get long trends, and you could say that the turn to authoritarian government, let's call it a great experiment in authoritarian government, began at around 1900 and has continued. The two previous ones, as I've mentioned, were the 3rd century in Rome and the 1500s in the rest of Europe. And each seemed to run, Jim, for about 120 years. And it takes that long for the bureaucracy to destroy the economy. And it takes that long for the general public to realize just how badly they're being screwed and then begin the popular uprisings that add up to a great reformation. That's a good question.
Are we entering into an anti-corruption cycle?
That's the same answer. Yeah, you got to look at the corruption of big government. In any time in history, big government is corrupt because it exists for itself, not for the public. So again, I wouldn't call it a cycle. It'd be going from the experiment in authoritarian government, going to a great. I'm going to back up on that one and say another great reformation as what followed in England beginning in the early 1600s. The rising middle class then had to take on a very ambitious government, and headed up by Archbishop Laud with his Star Chamber, which was really nasty. And if you were a middle-class, prosperous person and didn't toe the line, you'd have a good portion of your estate confiscated, and you would have your ears trimmed, cut off, and your face branded. They were very nasty dudes then. But the rising prosperity of the middle classes was able to eventually overthrow England's experiment in authoritarian government. And one of the delightful things to read about was their revolution of 1688, which is in the literature as the Glorious Revolution, because it was essentially bloodless, and business interest in London, plus widespread country support throughout the last absolutist king in England. And he had threatened to impose his will by bringing troops from France. So anyways, James then was, he saw that the tide was against him and went and sought solace in authoritarian France. It's really quite exciting to read about that, the Glorious Revolution.
Is there such a thing as the hoax cycle that would apply to the climate crisis and where it's headed?
Yeah, that's another thing, cycle. No, on this experiment in authoritarian government, the state chose theories that would enhance its wealth and power. And one theory has been the Keynesian economics, with all of the intrusion and currency depreciation, and it's crazy stuff, but it was only chosen because it enhances the power and wealth of the state. And then the other one has been a really weird notion that they could manage the temperature of the nearest planet. I mean, this really is madness. And if you just send enough money to the United Nations, they can make the climate perfect. Well, that really is absurd. So with a recession, the public will criticize central banking, and we're no longer in a warming trend. By the way, I did a degree in geophysics ages ago, and climate change and ice ages are very much a subset of geophysics, and I'm up to date on it. And this again, we are probably into a cooling trend, and the public will see that here is another nonsensical ambition by fraudsters in big government. So we are looking forward to very exciting times.
Does everything have a cycle?
Well, I keep arguing against cycles. Jim, I much prefer the term patterns, and you have recurring patterns, and the idea that you can sort of put semicircles on a chart of anything and it will be showing peaks or lows and be a regular cycle. It's not quite good. Much better is just to say, hey, here's a recurring pattern, whether it's in the financial markets or in the political markets, and the two go together. So anyways, that's a quick answer to the question about cycles.
How important is it for people to think for themselves?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I did an interview, I made it up, the interview with Mr. X about climate, and the theme was that each individual should look at all of the data themselves. And like, for example, the grave concerns about polar bears. So you look up polar bears. They've been there for about 400,000 years, so they have survived a number of ice ages and a number of interglacials. And the same thing with tropical corals. And they're worried about sea level rises and stuff like that. If you look it up yourself, tropical corals have been around for about 400 million years, for God's sakes, and they live and thrive at sea level. It doesn't matter what the sea level is. So this was the theme on this article I wrote, that people should take a look at the evidence, take a look at what's being touted, and make your own conclusion. And so if you look up bobhoye.com, I think that essay may be in that site.
Do you think President Trump will be reelected?
It looks good, Jim. Again, it's part of this trend for the public to take back their control of government, and the popular uprising in 2016 elected Trump as its executive, and he is doing a very fine job. It's driving the authority crazy, viciously mad, and now with the phony impeachment movement at an end, well, they'll keep talking about it, but it looks like the Democrat Party is dividing between extreme left and only left, and that's dangerous. And then also, Trump now is really the head of the Republican Party, and I think they'll be able to get the Republicans in name only, the rhinos, in line for the election on November 3rd.
Are Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage good for the future of Britain?
Oh, yeah. They've both made great gains in getting England out of Europe. And as Farage said, it originally started as a common market, and then it became much greater than that. I wrote a paper on that last year that outlined that Europe has had a tendency to get into very nasty experiments in authoritarian government. And so in the early 1800s, it was the French Revolution and Napoleon, and the Brits expanded a huge amount of treasure and blood to defeat that experiment in authoritarian government. Same thing beginning in 1914, and same again, the Brits led the movement to end military dictatorships in Europe beginning in 1939, and were successful in that, again, spending huge amount of wealth and blood to improve lives in Britain. And then, in Europe. And now they've ended up being no longer a sovereign nation and subject to a implacable bureaucracy in Europe. And this one, at the moment, is a welfare dictatorship. So the irony is incredible, where 3 times the Brits have saved Europeans from themselves, and then they end up being subject to Europe. So the Brexit move has been successful, and Boris is going to be a very effective prime minister.
People are being divided by race, politics, class, religion, and more, and a lot of it is due to propaganda. How can people become united again?
That's the same thing. The Democrats have used racism like you wouldn't believe, played off one class against another, played off one race against another. And as part of the reform, this will change, and people can go back to just ordinary living, or approaching it as best possible. That, with all the research I did on the long history of politics, going back 2,000 years, and I mentioned the 3 periods of experiments in authoritarian government, but the in-between, you can call it the default position, is people living with a government that is tolerant and a government you can afford. And that has been the default position and the natural position. The experiments in authoritarian government have been the exception. And as I said, this one's coming to an end.
Bob, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Hey, Jim, this has been a good set of questions, and we can look forward to getting together next week.
My guest has been market historian Bob Hoye. He's the chief investment strategist for chartsandmarkets.com. If you have questions for Bob, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.